Hello and welcome, folks. My name is Ryan Chapman, and I'm the author of SANS Forensics 528, Ransomware and Cybercrime. And we're here to talk today about the recent takedown of the LockBit ransomware group. I've been researching ransomware now it's been 3 or 4 years. It took a year and a half to complete my course. And I just basically live and breathe ransomware. So whenever there's a momentous occasion like this, I get very, very excited. And we have someone else who's very, very excited, and he's going to be joining us today to talk through all of this. So I'd like to introduce everyone to Will, who is the co-author of SANS Forensics 589 Cybercrime Intelligence. Will, how's it going, man? Oh, I think you're muted.
Thanks for having me on, Ryan. Yeah, going well, thanks.
Yeah, so Will is a prominent researcher of ransomware groups himself and extremely, extremely informed, and I'm very, very happy to have him on. So again, thank you for joining. We're going to be talking about what the heck happened here. First off, what was or is LockBit? It still is an is thing, by the way, and we'll get into that. How did this all happen? What does it mean for the team LockBit? What does it mean for the ransomware landscape in general? First and foremost, we would love for everyone who's attending to go ahead and drop where you're coming from. Where are you in the world right now? We have folks that are popping in from all over the globe, and we're very excited to see where you're quote unquote dialing in from, like you're on an old school phone, right? So let us know. Drop it in the chat. Where are you coming from? What's going on with you? If you have any questions or comments throughout, please drop them into the chat. We will be addressing questions toward the end. So, Will, can you give folks a little bit of a background on your experience so folks know who they're talking to?
Yeah, sure thing. So I currently work as a cyber threat intelligence researcher and threat hunter at Equinix, as well as being a co-author of the SANS 4589 Cybercrime Intelligence course. And the Cybercrime Intelligence course basically dives into the cybercrime underground, undercover operations, cryptocurrency analysis, as well as intelligence fundamentals as well. So it's been a mega project for me in the last nearly coming up to 2 years now, and can't wait to share it with everyone. But yeah, in my day job, general CTI threat hunting for a Fortune 500 company as well.
Very cool. Thank you very much. My course, Forensics 528, focuses on the prevention, detection, and processes for hunting for ransomware actors when they're in your network. It's an incident response focused course, whereas Will's course is more holistic and talks about overall how to track the threat actors themselves and their methodologies and things of that nature. So very happy to have you here. We're going to be SANS brethren for a while now, it seems, that we've got these two courses running.
Yeah,
so
right.
I see folks are coming in from all over the world. We've got India, Bahrain. We've got a number of places in the United States, New York, some from the United Kingdom. So keep those coming. It's really cool to see where folks are coming in from. And I guess we'll just jump right into it. And for anyone who's not aware, and I'd be surprised if some folks were just completely unaware, but LockBit, what is LockBit, right? Or LockBit 3.0, as most folks know them these days. So LockBit is a ransomware as a service group that essentially started in 2019-ish. And I'm going to flip it over to Will in a moment for him to give a little more background on their initial kind of coming up in the game, if you will. But more recently, they were responsible for 1,038 different leaks on their data leak site, by far the most out of any ransomware group for 2023. So they were way up there towards the top. In fact, if we look at the numbers, and I'm pulling these from ecrime.ch, one of my favorite places to look for numbers, we've got LockBit in the lead for 2023 by far with 1,038. Next up, we've got 422 by Alf VM or Black Cat. More on them coming up because they were also taken down. That's a big point we're trying to make here. And then Clop came in with 386. That, of course, being related to the Move It, I'll call it a fiasco, if you will, the 0 day that hit. And then we have Play coming in next with 308, and then rounding out the top 5 with 8base at 273. So basically more than double of the second team right behind them is what LockBit was responsible for. A massive group with a number of affiliates who was working with them. We'll see how that's going to play out in the future towards the end of this conversation. That's something we want to kind of project. So they basically took over kind of in the wake of the Conti team's disbanding in April of 2022. For anyone who's not aware, Conti was a major player. They were the #1 player in the game, ranging up to that date. They had a data leak following their basically putting out a press release essentially stating that they were for Russia in the Ukraine-Russia conflict, and there was a researcher who was very well related to the group, I should say, and affiliate based, and was able to communicate with some folks who's from the Ukraine who said, nah, and started leaking and releasing a bunch of their data. And it was a month or two after that where they basically had their downfall. So in April of 2022-ish, LockBit started to shoot up in terms of numbers, and a number of affiliates were moving around from the Conti team going to other groups. More on that also coming up. There were two primary personas, if you will, that function as the mouthpieces for LockBit. There was just LockBit, and then LockBit SUP, LockBit SUPP, which is the primary persona that many folks are aware of. It did kind of most of the communicating, even with media outlets and things of that nature. They had a very professional looking website. It looked like a completely legitimate business model, if you will. And they also had like a bug bounty program where they were offering money for people who would give them, bugs and tips and tricks on how to improve their software, their infrastructure behind it, including if anyone could identify LockBit SUP, they were offering $1 million USD. They were very brazen, if you will. I'm saying were, I should say are. Very brazen. At one point, they even were paying people to get tattoos, like tattoos all over their body of LockBit 3.0. And there was a number, 20 plus, that were supposedly actually paid out for that based on crypto wallet tracking and things of that nature. So they were a very, very big group. See, I keep saying in the past tense. I want to think of it in the past tense.
Yeah, unfortunately.
But Will, what about their kind of initial forming? What do you want to tell folks about where they got their their origin?
So the interesting thing about LockBit is they've been around a lot longer than some people may remember. To be honest, I've been working in the industry since about 2019, which is sort of when LockBit appeared. So I've been tracking them, here and there ever since. So they started off as a strain of ransomware called ABCD ransomware, sort of just generic, and then evolved into the LockBit that we know today. And they started off with a connection to the Maze ransomware, which is quite an infamous strain that sort of popularized the whole idea of data theft extortion and double extortion, encryption plus stealing files and leaking them. But they weren't actually, fun fact is that they weren't actually the first group to do that. It was actually Snatch Ransomware who did that in mid 2019, and May sort of took that and improved on it in towards the end of 2019. But LockBit actually began, they sort of caught the wave and rode into it and aligned themselves with Maze Ransomware, and even started publishing their own victims on the Maze Ransomware's leak site. So they kind of were starting to form what's known as the Maze cartel of ransomware families. But then, eventually Maze went away. They sort of shut down of their own accord, and eventually came back and rebranded as other strains, like Egregore. And I think they're sort of connected to Cactus Ransomware now, which is a currently active version, a distant relative of Maze, if you will. But LockBit went their own way. They understood the business model and they improved on it 100 or 1,000 times. So
much appreciated. So overall, let's talk about what happened. There was a takedown, law enforcement takedown, right? So Will, I'll toss this over to you. What happened? Who took them down?
So that was a coalition of law enforcement agencies, also known as Operation Cronos or Task Force Cronos. It was sort of led by the NCA, the UK National Crime Agency, and the FBI. And they had support from other law enforcement agencies as well, of course, as they always do, and they work together on against ransomware, because ransomware is a global issue. So you have to cooperate with international partners. So basically what happened is the law enforcement agencies, suddenly if you go to the LockBit site, a giant splash screen would show up saying, we have taken down LockBit, we've infiltrated them, and we've got all their information. It's kind of funny because they actually remodeled the leak site that they used to publish victim data to publish LockBit's own data. So they kind of really humiliated them in a way, and it was it's a historic takedown. I think we would be talking about this for years to come.
Yes, very much so. In fact, you mentioned the splash screen. So we have on the screen now, this is, or I should say was for a bit, maybe it's still up right now. I didn't check in the lab right before we started streaming. I should have checked. But this is the former LockBit data leak site, or DLS. And as you can see, if I zoom into this bad boy, you'll see that it was essentially taken over by law enforcement. And as opposed to having leaks from various organizations and companies and sample files that were stolen and threats for data to be sold and or provided publicly, we rather have information concerning the actual takedown. And so you'll see up at the top left-hand side up here, we've got press releases. We've got some information about them wanting to basically reveal the identity of LockBit SUP. We've got a link to the recovery tool that was built, and we have information about LockBit keys. So in regard to what they were able to do with this overall takedown, I'm just going to provide some numbers here. We're going to swap over. If you go to for528.com/LockBit, and I think we'll try to pop that onto the screen, or at least put it in the chat here. Oh, there it is. It's in chat now. Thank you, Stephen. Much appreciated. These are some of the numbers from Operation Cronos. And so we see that we have over 10 countries involved in the primary core task force. There were another 4 to 6 or so involved, though, that helped out and made this possible. There were 2 physical arrests, and that was in Poland and Ukraine. Yep. And there were more than 200 crypto wallets that were frozen, a number of assets that were frozen, 34 servers that were taken down, and over 1,400 accounts that were basically deleted. Now, a note on that, there's been a bit of recovery from the LockBit team. Not sure exactly how many of these things have been spun back up, but we'll leave that for a little further in the conversation. And law enforcement, yeah, definitely took control of their leak site. Again, as we see up here, you'll see information, for example, about the account closures. They were saying, hey, look at all these accounts that were closed. And the leak site itself was essentially closed because, yes, duh, it was taken over. There were multiple indictments. There's at least 5 indictments out that I'm aware of or have read about. There was a list of 194 different affiliates that were directly involved in LockBit matters. Now, when I say a list of them, I mean their online persona names were leaked out, if you will. So, what does that actually tell you in terms of the actors? Were currently unsure just how much law enforcement truly knows about these individuals. But there were 1,000 keys that were acquired and are basically being provided to anyone who contacts law enforcement. So if anyone watching this is realizing, wait, we were recently affected by LockBit, or if maybe it was in the past, I would still recommend that you reach out to law enforcement, because if you happen to have backed up some of your encrypted data that may have been crucial and you couldn't recover it, which is something we recommend in FOR 528, by the way, to back up that data, because at some point you never know when you might be able to decrypt it. And, here we go, right? And then also on the No More Ransom website, once again, that's No More Ransom, there is a decryptor that is now available. So, Will, what more do you want to add to essentially, what was done or able to be done because of the takedown?
I think the fact that law enforcement, this takedown was kind of interesting because law enforcement it seems they didn't really have a really long amount of time access to LockBit's panel from the outside. I obviously can't talk about much from the inside of what law enforcement did, but it seems they didn't have access to the site for long compared to the Hive operation, where they got in there and managed to steal decryption keys slowly over a long amount of time. So I think in this case, law enforcement really tried to maximize a very small opportunity they had, and they took it, and they really impacted LockBit on an international scale this way.
Will and I were talking just before the stream, and we were talking about the access that law enforcement had. So I'm going to change the screen over. Here is a screenshot on the back end, essentially one of the administrator pages of LockBit. So this is law enforcement showing, look, we had access to the infrastructure and we had access to the back end that only typically the operators would have had. And here's another screenshot basically showing some of the conversations. So the
victim
communications and
chats.
negotiations and things of that nature.
But they can get like
And
cryptocurrency addresses from those as well.
yes, yes. And that's something that you folks cover in your course, right? The tracking of those bad boys?
Absolutely, yeah. That's one of the primary things to go for if you're trying to tackle one of these ransomware organizations is follow the money every time.
Yes, follow the money. They try to tumble it, they try to clean it, they try to get it out. One of the articles that I read noted that there were over, over 500 active wallets, and that out of those, there was around, and this is only analysis of 18 months out of the overall data set, by the way. So the numbers will be bigger than this, but it was $100 million that was received by the LockBit team itself, their team. Their model is a bit different. And I personally believe, and I'll get your opinion on this, Will, too. So cue it up. That one of the reasons they were more successful than other groups is because what they started to do was allow the affiliates to collect the money and then actually pay them. Versus in other groups, it was the exact opposite. Whereas the core development team would receive the funds and then disperse it to the affiliates. So the affiliates feeling as though, well, if we collect the money in the first place, then it's more secure that we're going to get the money in the first place, right?
Yeah.
Have you looked at it in any of that stuff? The $100 million that was there, and the 90 million of that, by the way, and that's just from 18 months out of the data corpus. So there's more to be revealed here that was not yet spent, essentially.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a great point to raise, is that LockBit's as a ransomware as a service model was different to other groups, and their LockBit would only take a 20% cut of the ransom. So that $100 million that LockBit has means that 500 million has been taken paid in ransoms by other affiliates and things. So it's a massive operation, and I think the law enforcement agencies always also raise the fact that if you calculate how many companies were hit there and the cost of a breach per company, we're talking billions of dollars in damages and costs in recovery, in rebuilding, in consulting, and whatever. It's just a mega black hole on the global economy, really.
Yes, there was a 3-strike policy, kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing that was done. And let me switch my screenshot over to it. Over here, the LockBit SUP was actually banned from 2 of the largest, I should say large, I'll go with largest for now, especially in terms of ransomware. We'll just call them a darknet forum where these threat actors communicated. Exploit.in, XSS.is, those are the first 2 strikes. They were actually banned, or technically LockBit and then LockBit SUP were banned for a it seems like there was some issues with them maybe not paying affiliates. So maybe that model started to break down over time, and possibly that could have led to some overall issues, maybe even leading up to this. That's just conjecture, by the way. And then the 3rd strike was you've been banned from your own system. You've been banned from LockBit 3.0. And Will, what do you think about them being banned from the forums as they're trying to rebuild, but being banned? What are your thoughts on that?
So the forums are the central hub of how these ransomware groups recruit their affiliates from. It's how they market their services. It's how they get groups to come in. So if they have been denied access to these forums, then they basically are missing out on actually being able to grow as a service. I think one of the, like you mentioned, the Conti disbandment was one of the reasons that LockBit really blew up in the number of affiliates. Probably the same thing with the REvil shutdown as well in January, and the arrests there. Every time a ransomware group was shut down, it seemed most of the affiliates would just migrate over to LockBit. And the funny thing is about LockBit is that the organization is contactable via their messaging application. So if you have the code, then you can contact the operator and come up with a deal of how to become affiliate. The problem is, ever since this takedown, he now no longer can trust his affiliates, because this takedown was probably most likely something to do with one of those affiliates being arrested and flipped. Law enforcement basically pen testing the back end via the affiliate panel. And it's the ransomware panel itself is a single point of failure. It is something for law enforcement to go after, whereas if these 190 affiliates or so, it's really difficult to go after each one, figure out what country they're in, work with local law enforcement, all of that stuff. But if you go after the one panel, you can kind of get 190 for one.
Yes. Okay. We're going to kill the screen share for a moment now. We'll just have some talking heads for you. And we're going to talk about essentially, so how did they do this? How did the law enforcement get in? Now, how they specifically did it is currently a mystery to most of us in the world. However, LockBit Sup, again, the primary persona who is has been very even more vocal actually about the ongoings of the team, was made a statement, and it's a very long, it's a bit rambling, to be honest. Seems like he may have been perturbed at the time for obvious reasons. But he mentioned that it looks like it could have been a PHP vulnerability that was exploited. Specifically, the one that I just dropped into the chat, CVE 2023-3824, if anyone's interested in looking that up. But he's not specifically aware of how it was done. He, in his statement, notes it may have been this because he didn't update PHP. And I just think that is, what's the word I want? Hilarious.
He should have invested in a TVM program, right?
Right? I mean, come on now. One of the primary ways that ransomware actors get into an environment, right, is software vulnerabilities. And that has been going up and up and up and up in numbers over the years versus the other top two, which are remote desktop protocol and just standard phishing, basically. So having the possibility for this all have been possible because law enforcement noticed, like, oh, look, he's running old stuff, right? They're running old things, and there's a known vulnerability, and I'm just going to go, boop, boop, and then, okay. There was also a note in this statement by LockBit Sup that it may not have specifically been this CVE. It sounds like maybe they didn't run the best forensics on the whole thing. Well, now he did mention that some of the logs were encrypted, and that's why he was not able to get as much information technically. But which also is kind of funny because we run into that in incident response, right? What I've been doing for years is we run into logs that are encrypted, and we're like, oh, I really wanted those to determine the IV, the infection vector. He also mentioned, though, it may have been a 0-day. That's just conjecture on his side. There's no proof of it right now. But on that note, LockBit has already rebuilt most of their, well, I'm not saying most, at least some of their infrastructure and stood up new data leak sites. And in doing so, they used PHP once again. It is at the current version, but I kind of wonder if they felt that it may have been a 0-day for PHP. Why would they rebuild in PHP? I don't quite understand that. Well, what are your thoughts on the whole, how they might have gotten in versus the rebuilding with the same overall suite of software?
Yeah, we probably will never know, and that's the closest answer we've got. So we can only really speculate on how it really truly happened. But I mean, it's kind of funny, isn't it? Imagining these ransomware threat actors. LockBit claims he's worth $100 million, and he's worrying about what version. The thing that keeps him up at night is the version of PHP running on his servers. So it's kind of funny to laugh at him because he's basically a sysadmin at the end of the day. Doesn't really run ransomware attacks himself anymore, I don't think. So I think he wrote this massive essay about, like, that's how he found out about this. He wrote this massive essay saying, they attacked me and all, basically trying to undermine law enforcement and be like, ha ha ha, I'm still here, play the villain character. If Stephen wants to drop the link in the chat, I wrote like a bit of a Twitter thread on, TLDR on this, I think, a few thousand-word essay this ransomware actor wrote. But yeah, in that he said he wants to rebuild, and he's now starting to decentralize the affiliate panels, and you can only access it from, you're going to have a dedicated server to access your own panel, which means, you'll be generating your own payloads for the different LockBit versions, LockBit red, black, green, colors of the rainbow, whatever. So I guess, yeah, I mean, that's one way to do it. That's sort of similar how other ransomware groups are starting to react to being taken down, is splinter into different, if we segue into the next thing I wanted to bring up, was the ransomware groups are starting to splinter into smaller groups because it makes them less of a big target. LockBit is really one of the few big targets. Clop is the other one, and one of the reasons they're so successful is because they are quite a private group, really. They've never put an advert out on the underground forums, as far as I'm aware, to recruit affiliates like REvil and Clop has, and LockBit has. Clop is a private group, and that's one of the reasons why they've lasted so long without even a hint of a law enforcement takedown. And that's much harder to stop, and that's much easier for them to just keep going, especially if they're in a safe haven like Russia.
Speaking of takedowns and law enforcement involvement, this is not the first time that we've seen this type of activity. In fact, far from it. Their previous competitors were taken down and kind of led to more of a proliferation of their team and to bloom out and become bigger. So what are some of the more recent groups that we've seen that were prominent in their day, but have since essentially had to move to other groups or cease activities?
So in January 2023, we saw Hive be taken down. In late last year, I think October, November, we saw Alpha Black Cat being taken down. And those were law enforcement targeted, basically hacking back operations. They got into their system and took it down from the inside. Maybe there was also potentially some affiliate arrest and inside, plea deals and whatever's going on. You never know what's really happening with law enforcement behind the scenes until years later. Especially if you look at, if you compare back, maybe 10 years ago now, the big problem that was on everyone's mind were these darknet drug markets like Silk Road and Alpha Bay and things. And we saw comprehensive law enforcement operations to target the admins. So Silk Road, they social engineered Ross Ulbricht to be able to gain access to his laptop. But they can't really do that here because all the operators are in a safe haven like Russia. So it's definitely interesting to see law enforcement try and fight this almost impossible battle. And when they get a massive victory like this against LockBit, it's great to see.
So speaking of which, I'd like for both of us essentially to kind of speak a little bit to what does this mean for LockBit? First off, I'll reference there's two questions in the chat. There's a couple, but there's some that we've already starred for follow-up essentially. And it's, didn't they already rebuild? It is one. So the overall question is, what does this mean for LockBit going forward? The answer to that is yes, they've rebuilt. As part of the statement, there was LockBit stuff that noted that I believe he said all servers. I believe he said all, but don't quote me on that part. We're already backed up and have been recovered and are up and running and functional now. But they're not going to experience a zero fallout from this. That's not possible. Right. So my big takeaway is that I believe that more and more affiliates are going to be afraid to work with them because of what's happened. And if they're afraid to work with them, then they might move to other groups. They might form their own smaller core groups. There's been so many builders and just ransomware source code and things that have been leaked out in the past number of years that we see a lot of these smaller groups being spun up. Like we still see evidence to this day of the Babook builder being utilized. LockBit's builder has been leaked. It's sitting on VX Underground for everyone to review. Kind of like they're just out there. I think that the core problem they're going to have is gaining trust within the communities. The darknet forums they were losing trust right around this time, and now they're going to have less and less, which is a good thing for all of us, by the way. I feel like I'm saying it like it's a negative thing. No, this is a good thing. It's a good thing. That'll want to work with them. What about you, Will? What do you think in terms of the future of LockBit?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly difficult for him to carry on under this brand. One consideration to think about is the fact that five, six, seven people have been arrested or sanctioned. So if your organization is going to pay a LockBit ransom, then you're paying a sanctioned entity, much like Evil Corp. When Evil Corp was sanctioned, just no one would touch them with a stick, and no one wanted to risk paying that sanctioned entity. So they kept on having to rebrand, 5, 6, 7 times. So it's kind of bizarre to think how LockBit thinks he can just carry on as normal. It's incredible to think that he might just try and do it. I think he will just eventually fizzle out and realize that he needs access to those forums. He needs companies not to be scared about paying a ransom to a sanctioned entity, and the affiliates. At the end of the day, he's not running the attacks. He relies on those affiliates to launch the attacks at scale, to bring in the money. And because there's 10, 20 other big ransomware groups they can just shift to if they aren't using already. We've already seen cases where affiliates use 4, 5, 6 different RAS. So they're just basically, for them, it's business as usual. Just stop using LockBit, just move to another one. So yeah, I think eventually he'll probably have to shut it down, and he'll either rebrand or retire. I think it's only really one of those two. The only other option, which is a really, really, really slim option, is if the Russians do something. The Russians arrest him, like with our Evil, and that's the only other way he'll finally be done.
We actually have a survey. If we could pop that on the screen, the backend team has this prepped and ready to go. So you can participate in this survey by just scanning the QR code with your phone or going to slido.com, as you see on the bottom left-hand side of the page here, and entering number 2755653. The question is, will LockBit return to its former glory? What do folks think? Do you think, yes, they will return to their former glory? No, it's not going to happen, or maybe, kind of we'll wait and see approach. So if folks want to participate in that, again, you can, the first one came in, it's a no. You can scan the QR code or just go to slido.com and enter the number 2755653. Some maybe is currently winning. Now we're back to no. So we're going to bring this back up in a moment in the show. So please go ahead and participate in that. And we're going to move to the next topic of conversation. But first, if we can get my screen shared, there it is. So this is, we were talking about the sanctions list. And for anyone, especially outside the United States, who may not be aware, the U.S. Department of Treasury, there's basically a group underneath them known as the Office of Foreign Assets Control, or OFAC. And they have what you're seeing here on my shared screen, the sanctions list search tool. And essentially, it's a way to identify where there are sanctions already imparted, such that payments to them is not something that you want to be responsible for, that you want to be affiliated with. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Countries have their various sanctions lists, and OFAC is who basically runs this in the US. So I just wanted to throw that out there for anyone who may not have been aware. All right, we can kill the screen share, and I want to move on to one more question for us to kind of ponder before we move into actual questions from everyone online. And that is, what does this mean for ransomware overall? What is this? What's going to happen? There have been a number of folks on Twitter or X, or as John Hammond says, Twix, whatever it's called now, right? Who have essentially said, I love when he says that, essentially said that, ransomware's going away. These big groups keep getting taken down. It's not going to be a thing anymore. So I'm going to throw that right to you, Will. What are your overall thoughts on how is this going to impact ransomware? What's the future of ransomware?
Yeah, I think we are definitely going to see a rise of these, or a continuation of these groups that are more private and closed off. Those are the ones that law enforcement really struggle to deal with, due to that fact. We have Clop, who's been going since 2018. We have Fin12, who's been using a few different ransomware as a services, but they are a sort of a core team of pen testers or red teamers, whatever you want to call them, cyber criminals that use various different ransomware as a service, and they can just chop and go. So I think we're going to see more smaller splinter groups and more private closed off groups.
I 100% agree with that. There's a researcher out there who I'm very fond of, him and his work, Alan Liska from Recorded Future. If anyone's not familiar with him, yeah, shout out to Alan. Go follow him and check his stuff out. He's amazing. And he has been giving a talk for about a year or two now, if not longer maybe, about the de-razzing of ransomware and how these very large RAS operations are starting to be fewer and far between, whereas these smaller splinter groups have been forming and feeling more secure in doing so. And I think at this point that his future statement is becoming a reality statement at this point. And I totally agree that we're going to start to see more of that. The ransomware is not going away. It's far too lucrative. There's a number of reports. Every report has slightly different values, but a number of them have basically stated that was around $1 billion that was made through ransomware in 2023. And the numbers in 2022 were lower than 2023. And the numbers, and by the way, when I say the numbers, I mean the number of posts to data leak sites. So as Will and I have been talking about for a while now, there's really no way to know ever how many ransomware attacks have occurred. It's rather what we see being reported, but that's usually by the cyber criminals themselves. So, you have to take that with a grain of salt. But the 2024 January numbers were already higher than January of 2023. It's going up and up and up. There will most likely be, a gap in that. There will be a little bit of one of these bad boys because of LockBit. But, depending on how quickly other teams are formed out of this and how much they move around and get things going again, they're already rebuilt at this point. To what degree, I think, I don't know if we want to take their word on fully rebuilt, but just in terms of capabilities, I think that they're right back in the game. So the future will tell us what law enforcement does truly know about the various actors, including ones who have not yet had any law enforcement action taken on them. And I'm very eager to see more arrests and more indictments and maybe some more activity following those indictments. So, Will, what do you think about overall? We're about to hit questions, by the way, everyone. So if you have your questions, go ahead and toss those into the chat, and we'll take a few minutes to go through some of those. Do you think that that we're going to see another group take LockBit's place, like we kind of saw with Conti and LockBit, or do you think truly that the splintering is really going to be the future?
It's really hard to say, because LockBit's shown how much money you can make by following that business model. And even if you only do it for, half a year, there's a lot of money to be made there. So I think the groups that are currently active now, they have no reason to stop unless law enforcement comes after them. So, it's and LockBit, because LockBit benefited from Conti and Evil going down, there's another group out there who sees these 100+ affiliates looking for a home, and we may start seeing a lot more hiring adverts going out on the forum. So that's something to look out for, or maybe a shooting up of victim posts on another leak site. Those are sort of a couple of indicators we can use to figure out where this massive bunch of affiliates are sort of migrating to next. But it takes time to really truly calculate that.
Yes, time will tell on that. For sure, it will. We're going to move over to some questions that we have. So one of them, I actually really like this. I'm going to pronounce the name Akash. I apologize if I said that wrong, but I like this question. Do our medium-sized businesses have access to enough first responders for ransomware recovery? And I'm going to take that one first, Will, because I worked in the direct IR game for 4.5 to 5 years before recently moving to managed threat hunting at my quote-unquote day job. And my answer is no, not at all. Did they have access to enough of them in general? Well, there's a couple answers to that. One of them is that when there is a massive influx of clients coming in to the various incident response organizations, they can become just hammered and just not have enough bandwidth. The larger groups I won't name all the biggest, largest groups, but many folks who might be aware of who the incident responding firms primarily are that work with very large scale stuff. When they're working with that large scale stuff, their top, global size customers, then they may not have time to work with SMBs, small to medium businesses. And then beyond that, do they have access to the groups? Well, that really depends. If they can afford the actual work. And so incident response is it's an extremely detailed process, and it requires a number of people who have for years been working these types of cases to be, on board. Essentially, what I'm saying is it's not a cheap date. If you don't have cybersecurity insurance, it's oftentimes more than a medium-sized business can even pay. And sometimes, unfortunately, some of these medium-sized businesses look at the ransom and go, you know what, it would just be cheaper to pay that ransom, than even just pay for an IR group and hope that we can recover. And it's very unfortunate. I would love to see government organizations around the world do a little less you should do and do a little more let us help you enable to do the following. And I don't know where those funds are coming from. It's cute when I say that, I don't have to deal with moving those funds. Oh, sure, Ryan, whatever. But I'd love to see it. Will, what are your thoughts on that? Medium size, and I'll throw in small businesses dealing with IR.
Yeah, small businesses doing IR, responding to ransomware. So I have quite a few friends that work in instant response, and I chat to them about the latest trends and things. And here in the UK, the UK NCSC does a lot to help small businesses, and they are very proactive on, saying reach out to us if you have the issue. The NCA, I can only really speak to the UK, but the NCA and the NCSC do a lot of stuff to help small businesses. However, they are probably overwhelmed with the amount of ransomware attacks that get reported, because, second to the US, the UK is right behind you in number of ransomware victims. So it's a real problem for us. And my friends who've worked cases have said to me, this company we're here doing instant response for them, but there's no way they've already said we're going out of business. Stop doing IR, mid IR. And it happens, so it's really, it involves insurance, legal, police, government. It's the biggest challenge your business will ever face in many regards. You may be worried about if, when's the next delivery of stuff, but if ransomware is delivered, it's game over for some.
There's a lot of questions, and we want to try to keep this. Our original goal was 30 minutes, and we have two folks like Will and myself to
good topic.
That's not going to happen. No. Yeah, there's a lot of questions to cover here. I like this one though, because I think that it's very important that more folks know about this. So someone just says LinkedIn user on my screen, but it says shifting left. IABs, which are initial access brokers, and it's on the screen right there for you. Info stealers help ransomware groups. Has Google or other browser software companies attempted to address info stealers in a practical way? And I recently did an episode of the SANS Wait Just an InfoSec live show. And if you want to show, there we go on my screen here. If you go to sans.org/WJAI, Wait Just an InfoSec, you can scroll down just a little bit, and you'll actually see an episode that we did right here with Ann Pham, aka Russian Panda, and we talk about IABs and we talk about info stealers quite a bit in the feature segment there. I wanted to highlight that, and that'll be my little portion. Will, what do you think about IABs and info stealers, and what the global community is doing to stop these credentials from getting out there and then being turned over in some way, shape, or form to ransomware actors?
Yeah, it's a massive problem, and it's a great thing to highlight when you're talking about it. It's part of the ransomware economy. It's part of the issue. In 4589 cybercrime intelligence, we go through the info stealer lifecycle, the ecosystem, the marketplaces, the whole from malicious spam email or cracked software all the way up to ransomware deployment. It's a huge thing, and it's a good point to focus on the fact that these credentials are stored in the browser, and should browser companies be responsible for securing those credentials, or is it up to the user to secure the credentials in the software they're using? Password managers exist, multi-factor authentication exists. You don't have to store them in the browser, but yes, it's a tricky one. And I think they might be alluding to an issue that's sort of crept up in the last 2 to 3 months, is this whole premise of a zombie cookie, which in Google Chrome, if someone steals the credentials from your browser, the cookie, the authentication session cookies, even if it expires, there's actually a technique that a couple of stealer families were using to regenerate that cookie, and log into your Gmail account, get the synced credentials across your accounts. And we've seen companies like Cisco and Okta be breached through this vector. Massive companies who pour millions into security, they still struggle from this just eternal challenge of sort of a gray noise of malware and stolen credentials that's just super hard to stop.
100% agreed. I see too many of them being sold on the dark web to ever feel good about the fact that they're just so common at this point. So we're going to wrap it up because we got to get out of here. Will, thank you ever so much for joining along. We'll try to throw the link to your course on up on the screen here. So, here we go. Actually, we can use this for a moment. So this is the results of the poll. So 40% of people say that LockBit will not return to their former glory.
That's what
maybe is 33%, and then yes is 27%. I'm a no. I think, Will, you're also.
Well, I'm a please no.
Yeah, let's go with that. Oh, yours is better answer than mine. Let's go with the please no. We should have put please no on there. Please no. Yeah, I like that. So we'll throw information on your course on the slide. Folks can reach you at Bushido Token, and you also have a website, right?
Oh, that's right, bushidotoken.net. That's my sort of personal blog where I write independent research, so things that I just find interesting. Recently looked at the iSoon, Chinese intelligence contractor who recently had a massive leak as well, and I just like to go through things like that in my spare time.
Oh, you're a nerd like me. People are like, what do you do for hobbies? And you're like, I work. What do you mean? I research for work stuff, duh.
Yeah, I just went through Chinese intelligence stuff. What about you?
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, I am Ryan Chapman signing off for Will and myself, saying thank you very much for joining us. We both really hope that LockBit does not return to its former glory. They're already back up and running. How much more can law enforcement do? How much more information do they have? That all just kind of remains to be seen. So hopefully we were able to give some folks some good information about the whole thing, right? And try to understand what really happened and what's going down. We appreciate everyone joining. Thanks for your questions. We definitely appreciate our audience feedback throughout. Share this around once it hits YouTube, get a few more people educated on the topic. And I'm sure that Will and I will be doing another one of these, hopefully sometime soon.
Amen.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Much appreciated.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.